was a story I once heard that I found hard to believe. My mother had learned it from her grandfather when she was a child. Their family had made their living from fishing for generations. Her grandfather was the head of the fishermen in their village. According to my mother, he once told her something truly extraordinary. When he was still a young man, he had several times encountered the bodies of people who had drowned at sea while out fishing. These floating corpses would drift among the waves, usually in a gruesome state. What was eerie, though, was that whenever they came near a boat, the bodies would move toward it. This was before the war, so the local fishermen still used old-fashioned boats without engines. Most were simple wooden vessels propelled by oars. After meeting a floating corpse, my great-aunt's grandfather would row desperately, trying to get away from it. Strangely, the body would always follow close behind. Since he was usually alone on his small boat, he couldn't pull the corpse aboard, and because he had to earn a living, he couldn't stop fishing just because of one floating body. In such situations, the fishermen would recite a kind of prayer or incantation. They would address the drowned corpse directly, "I'm sorry, but I need to start fishing now. Please move away a little and don't disturb my work. In return, I promise to let you return safely to land." My great-grandfather said that whenever they did this, something miraculous would happen. The drowned body would bob up and down in the waves but keep a certain distance from the boat. Then, once the fishing was finished and it was time to head back, they would speak to the corpse again. "The fishing is over now. We're going home. Please follow closely and come with us." Incredibly, after this second prayer, the body would maintain that same careful distance and follow the boat all the way back to the harbor. My mother's grandfather used to say that no matter what a person becomes, they never want to remain forever in the sea. After hearing my mother tell this strange tale, I often thought that perhaps returning to land is simply part of human nature. The story itself may not be particularly frightening, but I want to share my own experience. I have always disliked the sea. What happened to me 2 summers ago, when I went to the beach, only deepened that feeling. I am someone who simply cannot swim in the ocean. I can swim in pools and rivers, but never in the sea. That fear goes back to when I was in elementary school. One summer vacation, I went swimming at the beach and nearly drowned. My friend who was with me also got into trouble. I was rescued, but my best friend died. I'm ashamed to admit it, but at the time I was so terrified that I barely remember the actual moment of drowning. All I recall is that some adults who were swimming nearby pulled us both ashore. They rushed us to the hospital. After emergency treatment, the doctors and nurses kept tilting their heads, staring at our feet. Both my friend and I had dark bruises around our ankles, on both feet, as if someone had grabbed us hard. Later, after the doctors and police discussed it, they guessed that in our panic, when one of us started to sink, the other had probably grabbed their ankles, trying to climb up and save themselves. That was what caused the bruises. After that incident, I stopped swimming in the sea. I even grew to hate water in general and avoided swimming pools too. As time passed, I gradually overcame my fear of water, but I still could never bring myself to swim in the ocean. The reason was simply that my friend had died beside me. It was something deeper and inexplicable, lingering terror. Even though I no longer remembered the details of the drowning, that nameless dread kept me away from the sea. Every summer since then, I have returned to that same beach to pay my respects to my friend who died there. 2 years ago, as an adult, I drove there just as I always had. That day, the sun was blazing. I sat on the scorching sand, but there wasn't a single person in sight. I wondered if everyone was staying away because jellyfish had started appearing in the water around that time of year. I walked a little farther, sat down again, and opened 2 glass bottles of the drink my friend and I used to like. I drank one and planted the other in the sand as an offering to him. Our shared memories had faded somewhat with the passing years, but the times we played together remained irreplaceable. As I sat thinking about my friend and gazing at the sea, about 10 minutes went by. Then I noticed something moving in the distance. Looking closer, I saw that the surface of the water not far from shore was churning violently, splashing everywhere. I was certain someone was in trouble. Without thinking, I stripped off my clothes, leaving only my underwear, and jumped into the sea. Strangely, even though I had always been so afraid of swimming in the ocean, at that moment I felt no fear. I wasn't even sure I could reach the person before they lost their strength. But none of that mattered. A life was about to slip away right in front of me. I held it to stand by. The memory of my friend drowning flashed through my mind, how I had been helpless then, choking on water, unable to do anything. I refused to let it happen again, so I swam with all my might toward the struggling figure. I don't remember how long I swam. Just as I was getting close, the thrashing arms suddenly vanished beneath the surface. My heart sank. It's gone under, I thought. In that instant, I felt something grab my foot and drag me downward, pulling me under the sea. Underwater, I could sense someone gripping my left ankle. Though the water was murky, I could tell it wasn't a living person, because what I saw was a woman with long hair, wearing a long dress. Was murky, I could tell it wasn't a living person, because what I saw was a woman with long hair, wearing a long dress. Wearing clothes like that, there was no way she could have been swimming in the sea. And when our eyes met, I saw she was wearing a smile that sent chills down my spine. The moment I saw her expression, I was terrified. I kicked at her desperately with my right foot, trying with all my strength to shake her off. But she clung to me with a death grip, refusing to let me leave the water. Underwater, I couldn't breathe. My oxygen was almost gone. I felt death slowly closing in around me. Just as I reached my limit and thought I couldn't hold on any longer, someone grabbed my arm. I turned to look. It was my childhood friend. She was right there, wearing the same swimsuit she had on the day she drowned. She held my arm with both hands and looked at me with a gentle smile. Her smile was completely different from the one on the woman gripping my left ankle. It was the same warm smile we shared when we played together as children. I stared at her and thought, is it really you? If I have to die now, at least I got to see you one last time. The moment that thought crossed my mind, my body rose to the surface, breaking into the blinding sunlight. The grip on my ankle had vanished, and my friend's voice had disappeared too. I gasped for air, feeling the life rush back into me. For some reason, I started to cry. Later, using my own strength, I swam back to shore. Sitting on the sand, I looked at the large bruises on my left ankle where the woman had grabbed me, and on the arm where my friend had held me. I wondered, had my friend really saved me just now? I never imagined, and I would almost drown in the exact same spot twice. What was that story about? And who or what was that terrifying woman? After I calmed down on the beach, I stood up to head home. That's when I noticed the bottle of cola I had stuck in the sand for my friend. Half of it was gone. It really had been her who saved me. If my friend hadn't pulled me up, that horrifying woman might have dragged me down into the deep sea and buried me there forever. It was a small misunderstanding, and the story I experienced back then. When I was 2 or 3 years old, my family told me this story. One Sunday afternoon, we all went to the seaside to fish. It was a popular spot, and many families had come out to enjoy the day. There was a girl about my age who had come fishing with her father. Somehow she fell into the sea. Someone spotted her and shouted that a girl had fallen in. My father heard the cry, dropped his wallet and cigarettes, and jumped straight into the water. It was already close to autumn, so the sea was very cold. In short, my father thought it was me who had fallen in, so he dove in without hesitation. But it wasn't me, it was someone else's child. Still, he couldn't just ignore her, so he swam toward the girl. Normally, when people drown, they panic. They thrash around wildly, which often makes rescue difficult and can even drag the rescuer under with them. But as my father swam toward her, the girl wasn't crying out. Her expression was strange. She just kept slapping the surface of the water, struggling. When my father finally reached her and tucked her under his arm, she was shivering from the cold and clung tightly to him. He tried to comfort her, saying, "It's okay now. Then he slowly swam back. As they approached the pier, our whole family and some other adults were waiting, along with the girl's father, ready to pull them up. But right as they got close, the girl suddenly started crying and thrashing. My father faintly heard a voice saying, "They were the ones who threw her into the sea." The moment he heard those words and felt a flicker of doubt, he sensed countless hands wrapping around the girl's neck and back. The hands weren't pulling her downward, they were just holding on tightly. Amid the sound of the waves and the girl's cries, my father also heard faint moaning voices saying, "Help me. I want to live too." The girl kept kicking at the water, trying to get away from something impossible to understand. Because she was crying and struggling so violently, my father gave up on climbing onto the pier. Just as he turned toward a nearby shallow beach, someone called for a fishing boat, and both he and the girl were pulled aboard. Once they were on the boat, the girl suddenly became calm, almost happy. My father thought to himself that her fear must have simply faded away. Then one of the fishermen said to him, "You okay? Your throat and back are covered in scratch marks from hands. That kid's got quite a grip." My father recalled the situation. When he first reached the girl, she had been eerily quiet, almost like a doll. But near the pier, she had suddenly become frantic. It did feel strange. By then, our worried family and the girl's father were waiting at the fishing harbor. My father and the girl, both soaked through, finally came ashore looking miserable. They changed clothes on the second floor of the Fishermen's Association and wrapped themselves in blankets to warm up. At that moment, my father said to the girl, "I'm so glad you're safe." But her reply sent a chill straight through him. In a very small voice, she whispered to my father, "It was my dad who did it." Later, my mother told me that my father's arms still bore the marks where the girl had gripped him so tightly. On top of that, his back and waist were covered in all kinds of handprints and scratches of different sizes. What was eerie was that many of those marks were in places the girl could never have reached. Afterward, the police and some other organizations arrived as well. The father also received suggestions that he should be commended, but he was deeply unsettled by what the girl had said and felt a lingering fear. He had no desire to remain connected to that father and daughter or the local people, so he declined. After hearing the full details of this experience, I was overcome with terror. To this day, my father still doesn't know whether the girl's words were true or false. If they were true, why would her father have done such a thing? Was it to fraudulently claim insurance money? Or was it some kind of ritual? And the voices my father heard in the sea, could they have been cries for help from others who had met the same fate and perished? This is a story I wish I could erase from my memory. A long time ago, I traveled alone to a small seaside town. The tourist season by the sea had already passed, and I was the only guest at the guest house. It was a quiet night. I carried a can of beer down to the shore and sat on the concrete steps that connected the road to the beach. I stared into the dark ocean, listening to the waves crashing against the sand. My thoughts tangled and heavy. Some unpleasant things had happened in my life recently, leaving me in a gloomy mood. With a melancholic heart, I reflected on the past. That was when I noticed a dark, solid mass drifting at the edge of the surf. I thought it was a fish or some other sea creature, so I walked toward it without much concern. As I approached, however, I caught a whiff of decay mixed with the sea breeze. Only when I drew closer did I realize it was the body of a drowned person. My first instinct was to call the police, but then I thought it might be better to notify the guest house first. Back then, cell phones weren't as common as they are now, and I had no idea where to find a public phone near the beach, so I stood there, uncertain. In that moment of hesitation, the corpse suddenly stirred. It rose and moved toward me with surprising speed. As it came closer, pieces of something incomprehensible kept falling from its body. I was so terrified that I collapsed onto the sand. Under the glow of the streetlight, I saw wet, rotting flesh and various small creatures dropping from every part of the corpse. They might have been crabs or shrimp, but what I remember most clearly were the small fish leaping on the sand. Then it reached me. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move as its dripping fingers pried my mouth open. It shoved its sparsely haired, muddy head into my mouth. As absurd as it sounds, at the time I had no idea what was happening. Its head, arms, and shoulders all forced their way inside. I felt a cold, slimy sensation sliding down my throat and spreading into my stomach. Its body felt strangely boneless, soft and mushy like tofu. The thing violated every law of physics as it crawled entirely into me. Only when it had reached my waist did I finally snap out of my shock. I struggled violently, fighting to push it out. That was when an overwhelming stench of rot hit me. I tried to close my mouth but couldn't, and my tongue tasted a faint soreness. I don't know how long I fought before my memory simply cut off. I must have passed out. When I regained consciousness, my whole body was chilled through from the constant sea wind. I stood up from the sand and took a moment to collect my thoughts. I looked around the beach, but there was no sign of the drowned corpse, no scattered rotting flesh, no small creatures. Everything was perfectly normal. I told myself it must have been a dream, yet the vivid sensation remained etched in my mind. Even if it had only been a nightmare, the discomfort was unbearable. Suddenly my chest tightened, and I vomited right there on the spot. I emptied everything onto the sand, tears streaming down my face as I stared at what I had brought up. Among the mess, many things were still wriggling, fighting back the acidic stench. I leaned closer for a better look. What I saw were countless struggling sea cockroaches. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Had they crawled into my mouth while I was unconscious? Or had none of it been a dream? Had it actually happened? Had that thing burrowed inside me, and these sea cockroaches had made their way into my stomach? Was the drowned corpse still somewhere within my body even now? The thought brought on a wave of eerie nausea. I desperately wanted to forget the horrible delusion, but I couldn't. A heavy, black terror pressed down on me. Even though there was nothing left to bring up, I kept vomiting uncontrollably. As I etched, all sorts of thoughts swirled through my mind, though I couldn't clearly say what they were. I only remember someone once telling me that if you vomit hard enough, you might end up throwing up your own organs. At that moment, I truly wished I could vomit out my insides. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I was still halfway through vomiting. I heard a worried voice calling out. It was the landlady from the guest house. She had grown concerned when I didn't return from my evening walk and had come looking for me. Tears streaming down my face, I told her what had just happened, stopping twice more to retch violently. Eventually, I followed her back to the guest house. I took another long shower, and only then did the trembling in my body begin to ease. By the time I stepped out of the bathroom, the landlady had already called the police. 2 officers were waiting for me in the lobby. I recounted everything that had occurred on the beach, but they didn't seem convinced. They had already searched the area and found nothing unusual, only my vomit staining the sand. It was very late, and since I appeared otherwise unharmed, the officers eventually left. I collapsed into bed and tried to sleep. The next morning, the landlady was still clearly anxious about me. My stomach was in no condition for food, so I politely declined breakfast. Afterward, I returned to the beach with the police for another look. In the bright daylight, there was still no trace of any drowned corpse, only the dried remnants of my vomit. I stood there on the sunlets, and staring at the spot where it had all happened, feeling utterly bewildered. In the end, they concluded I must have gotten drunk, wandered onto the beach, and hallucinated the whole thing. Later that day, I left the town behind. Even now, I still think about those terrifying stories, people who didn't escape in time, only to be found completely out of their minds. It seems to happen more often than one would expect. I can't help wondering, could they have lost their sanity because something had entered their bodies? Perhaps I am just a rare exception who happened to maintain a normal state. But if I had to experience the same thing again, I think I might go mad too. And ever since then, every time I feel the sea breeze, the memory of that night comes flooding back. The wind that night carried more than salt and cold. It carried whispers, soft, insistent voices that seemed to rise from the black water itself, mingling with the creak of the hull and the distant slap of waves. I stood at the railing long after the others had gone below, staring into the darkness where the sea met the sky in an unbroken void. Something had changed out there, though I couldn't yet name it. The air felt heavier, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath, waiting. In the days that followed, the crew spoke less and less. Smiles grew thin, eyes darted toward shadows that hadn't been there before. Old tales resurfaced around the messed able stories of vessels that wandered too far from familiar currents and returned with crews who were never quite the same. Men who laughed at the wrong moments, or fell silent when the wind shifted. Men whose reflections in the water no longer matched their movements. I kept my distance from those conversations, but the unease settled deep in my bones. Sleep became restless, filled with dreams of pale figures drifting just beneath the surface. Their faces turned upward, mouths open in soundless calls. Each morning I woke with the taste of brine on my tongue and the unshakable feeling that I had answered something I shouldn't have. Even now, years later, the memory lingers like fog that refuses to lift. When the sea breeze brushes my face, I pause, I listen, and for a fleeting instant, I swear I hear it again, that faint, beckoning murmur rising from the depths, patient and eternal, inviting anyone who dares to lean just a little closer to the edge.